I was going to be talking on the artificial intelligence centered insurance insurance company we're building out. We are finding the intellectual property for that at the moment. Not going to be able to talk about that too much until the filing has all gone through. But just as soon as it does, then we'll be talking publicly about that. So instead of talking about the insurance product, which is pretty disruptive anyway, I thought it might be useful to talk about general approaches towards using AI for disruption. So I thought that might be as useful anyway. For the purposes of this talk, artificial intelligence really is being used in a very broad sense. So everything from something very sophisticated, deep learning and so on, to really simple machine learning type techniques is what I mean by this. So in other words, you can have a big impact using simple technology if you approach it in a new way. In terms of disruption or disruption with AI, again, it doesn't need to be very, very large market disruption or the type of, say, Airbnb or Uber, but obviously they are having a very large effect. So going back to the Netflix example, back in 2008, the CEO of Blockbuster, which at the time was by far the largest video sharing platform, basically said that Netflix wasn't going to be a problem, wasn't going to be an issue, and it wasn't something we were worried about. 2 years later, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy, and obviously really doesn't exist anymore in any meaningful way. Both Blockbuster and Netflix have, or rather had, access to exactly the same technology and the same, shall we say, engineers, the same approach on information. And yet Netflix could take it somewhere very different by thinking about the future in a new way. In one respect, this is you have three options. And in one respect, this is how to think about AI for disruption in a business setting. And obviously, a lot of you are data scientists, come from an engineering background. But I think it'd be useful to put the sort of work that's been happening into a wider context. So at the moment, we have, in a business context, three different things we can do. We can wait and see, which basically means, hey, let's see where the market's going to go. I'm not going to talk about that today. If, as a business, that's your approach, then I think you're going to join the likes of Kodak and Nokia and just become redundant. You're part of the past. The second approach is to use AI for automation in some shape or form. Now, this is the vast majority of what's being talked about at the moment. How do we make something faster? How do we make something cheaper, process-wise, and so on? This is absolutely fine and a good place to start, but if we're not making anything more intelligent, or we don't have a smarter insight, then everyone else is doing the same thing. So there's going to be no advantage over time. Some of the projects we're working on don't ignore this aspect, but say, well, yes, we can make something faster, we can make something cheaper, but really what's the bigger thing we can do? The third is what I'm calling full use AI. It's really just to say that there's a lot more we can do. So where's AI heading? What potentially can it be doing in a few years out? And how do we make most sense of that? So I'm going to give you some of the approaches that we that we take in terms of how we think about what could be built for disruption, and then also go over some of the projects we're working on, so we have an idea of what's possible. I'd love to talk about some of the more really cutting edge stuff, but some of that's under wraps for a little bit longer, so apologies there. In terms of how to think about AI for application, I would suggest dividing into three fairly separate areas. The first obviously is the AI tool you're going to use, and I describe AI as simply a number of tools which will make an action happen. This is to not necessarily reduce the complexity of what these all do, but more to say, hey, these are tools and they're all for a particular outcome, or they all produce a particular action. So I'm combining everything from machine learning, natural language processing, chatbots, and so on, and just describing them as a tool. Of course, the more you combine together, the more sophisticated result you can end up with. But yeah, to really think of them as a tool, and not necessarily as the starting point, but just options. The second is to be thinking about data. When I think about data, the thing I'm interested in is what is the insight the data can give us, and also what's missing. So that's a big piece, I'd say, that we can dig into a lot more, that we can have a better understanding of the world through data. But what type of world is it, and what's missing? The third is to really start to ask better questions. What is at the core of a business or a service? What are some of the things that really matter there? And also, where can the biggest impact happen? If you lead with any of these three pieces independently, you will end up with a result which will not necessarily work. So if you just start with the AI tool and to say, no, we have to have a chatbot, well, firstly, what's the impact of it? What data do you have to make a better chatbot? But also, what question are you trying to answer with that approach? The much better thing is to aim towards some sort of balance, some sort of harmony between the three. In reality, the relationship between the three, between the tool, the insight, and the question, is complicated. It's this is the work of doing it. This is the challenge. It isn't a clean process. I think we all wish it were, but it isn't. But that's the work, if you like. So yes, I think if you can aim towards some sort of balance, balance between all three, then usually it works much better. You will probably also want to think about diversity in a lot stronger way than you're used to. So when I'm talking about diversity, diversity of the team of people you have working on a project, that you really, if you have, let's say all your team is male and white and the same sort of age, same sort of background and so on, the same worldview, then you'll end up with a result which is probably going to be very well suited to that group, but at the expense of everyone else. If you also have a single worldview, you're going to be missing out on the other views, and I would suggest that you're going to end up with a solution which is also very narrow from an experience point of view. Again, your view on diversity is not just looking at internal data, but external, thinking about what's missing, and really trying to build up the team, but also the view on the world of where you are. This is especially true with the sort of data we have at the moment. Most of it is rather limited, most of it is rather basic, and I'd say it's also limited in what's being acted upon. The biggest roadblock you'll have is legacy systems, so hardware, software, and also the approach with each. These, I wouldn't necessarily say, hey, let's get rid of everything, but rather, what are the things which are the roadblock? What is the thing that's getting in the way of being able to challenge, being able to change, being able to create the sort of effect you're really looking for? The much bigger roadblock is legacy thinking. This, in a nutshell, is why digital advertising doesn't work anymore. The approach is about 10 years old, it's horribly dated, and it just doesn't actually work. So I'd say it's legacy thinking which is stopping sort of development you would want in that area. In terms of banking, I would suggest that the time frame is more like 50 years, where a lot of the products and services have come from a different generation, and that we're in a new way and system thinking. So if you're thinking in the past, then AI isn't going to integrate or work well. In something like law, I'd say it's probably even further back, and actually quite a lot of medicine as well is also quite dated. So just because you're using a new instrument doesn't mean that your approach isn't necessarily better. So let's go over some of the projects that we're working on at the moment to give you one view on how we think about AI use, how we think about data, and how we fundamentally ask much better questions. So one of the projects we're working on is software which can eliminate bias from the hiring process. So we look at the sort of language people use, the sort of all the sort of things which will indicate if someone is male or female, or their age, their ethnicity, and so on. And we can strip out those key indicators and get towards a profile which is now bias-free. The same approach in software can also make a perfect match between one person in a million to that perfect job, where they're perfectly suited with the right hard skills, soft skills, right background, and so on. So it's really looking at data. It's trying to be much more holistic, much wider with the approach, and fundamentally rethinking what work is and how it can be improved. So it's not an incremental improvement. It's not making things a little bit faster or a little bit cheaper. It's completely reshaping how AI can have an impact on work by looking at the bigger picture. Another project is, and I won't talk about this too much because this has been covered before, but it is early skin cancer detection. So looking at a very large set of images, deciding if something is or could be cancer or not, and already it's beating the human oncologist by a small but meaningful percent. So the oncology approach really is, well, you should be using technology. This is something that can fit on your smartphone, and the results are fantastic. What's even better is the oncologist and the device and the AI working together. This is the one that beats everything else, and we really think this is the future. So that you end up with the expert human and the expert system working hand in hand, as it were. So the skin cancer detection looks at a type of image recognition, edge detection, and so on. And our first thought is, well, it works here. What else can we use it for? So we've gone from, shall we say, biomedical towards object grading, in this case, diamond grading. And a diamond is a good subject because there's only a few things you grade on. So clarity and color being the obvious ones, size as well. And at the moment, this type of grading is done by humans. It's rule-based. You have a rule set that you should work towards. But because we're human, we make errors, we make judgment calls, so our accuracy could always be better. So exactly the same approach has been used for the skin cancer detection, except here we have a very recognized set of rules. So the first thing we do is understand what that rule set is, and then look quite separately at what's being delivered on the data side. These are different things. The way this will end up disrupting the market is if you have a perfect grading system, which is global, then you've eliminated the uncertainty throughout the market of exactly what a grade is. So you can now be absolutely sure what your grade of diamond is, and that grade becomes universal. We are also working in for coffee bean and a few other food items, but this is much harder, and it's not necessarily going to work in the same way because the quality of food also becomes with it isn't just visual; it's chemical as well. But taking what we are learning from skin cancer detection and diamond grading, we are also moving towards some of the early work on embryo grading. So if we understand a lot more about how something is graded and we can make a, shall we say, a perfect market, then it actually means we start to have a universality and a baseline that can be used to start to understand what impacts are happening on grading more universally. So embryo grading, at the moment, we're looking for the visual aspects of grading. So it's edge detection on edge detection and image and object recognition on a large set. At the moment, it is being done independently, and what I mean by that is it's being done without understanding the source of the embryo and the background there. So that really changes what can be understood in the grading. So it's a fairly fixed message at the moment. Taking a very different approach is working on a project which will effectively eliminate jet lag. So at the moment, coming back from Amsterdam, I'm suffering from horrible jet lag this time because I didn't quite follow the sort of rules that you should do, which would have been helpful. We understand what makes or creates jet lag. It's due to your body rhythms, temperature of light, quantity of light, your diet, how much coffee you drink, and so on. So the scientific work on why do we have jet lag has already been done. What we're doing is combining a social profile and a social understanding of the movement of people, and we are redesigning an aircraft and an airport so that with just a little bit of understanding of the individual, we can end up with, well, no jet lag. So as soon as we know if someone's traveling east or west and by what amount, we can start guiding them in a certain way. We can start guiding them towards a certain type of diet, a certain type of sleep pattern, and so on. The infrastructure of the new airport and the airline will help that. So it'll help with the process of getting ready for being in the new time zone. So this is a different approach because it is going to take an awful lot of architectural changes to make this happen, but we think the impact is going to be very large and a different sort of impact. So some things to think about in terms of disruption is start using AI now. Start thinking about your data in a smarter way. Definitely ask better questions, but most of all, be brave and be willing to disrupt. Be willing to make the change in the world rather than simply making something a little quicker or a little cheaper. So thank you. I hope that helped. Very happy to answer questions as they come in. Thank you.